not sitting-minded. I'm not sitting-minded. Oh. We can sit right there. There's right next to Jeff. There's... Coffee! Where's everybody?
Because that's a...
Mom, I have to sit next to a suitcase again. Mom, I sit next to a suitcase. Oh my God, it's so cool. Yes! My brother
Let's still be respectful and make sure we're paying attention to our presenter, not the material that he's given you to look at later. But I appreciate you, and we're excited about our next session. We have Wonders of God's Creation. So thank you for getting back to your spot appropriately, and we will turn it back over for our next session. Thank you.
You know, I have experienced that throughout my 48 years, that very few people have ever come up to me and said, you know, they just don't like animals, like all animals. By the way, if you can't hear me in the back, let me know, and I can put on the microphone if you can't. So just let me know if you can't hear me. You know, I don't know that I've ever met someone who said, I cannot stand bunny rabbits. Bunny rabbits are now, there might be some, okay, I get it. But I would almost like have to scratch my head and cock my head a little bit and think, now, why do you so anti-bunny rabbits, okay? You know, some people, they may not like every animal, but most people just love, they love going to the zoo, or at least parts of the zoo. They like to go, you know, if you ever get a chance to go on a safari somewhere, that's amazing. I was in Tennessee, in between Memphis and Nashville a few months ago, and went to this place called Southland Safari, where they have about 120 acres of all sorts of amazing animals. You don't have to go to Africa to see amazing animals. You know, people who love maybe go to the zoo and maybe they see the lions and the tigers and bears and elephants and giraffes and even monkeys and stuff, do some kind of funny things. Maybe you like to go to the park. Like my family has enjoyed going through the years, and even when my daughter was real little, she still liked to go. That's not my daughter, that's one of my sons. Even when she had her fingers bitten by a goose or something, she still enjoyed going to the park. I like to see birds feeding in a bird feeder. I mean, they look like they're about to dive into it. Or looking at a cicada, some of which live underground for 17 years. 17 years and then come out and metamorphose. You don't have cicadas out in Texas like we have in Alabama? Woo! Well, we got them in Alabama. I guess y'all got them here too. You know, some people, they like to walk outside and see it. I mean, maybe find a turtle. I mean, turtles are neat. Or maybe you like to catch a lizard and take a picture with it. Or a baby frog. A baby frog. Yeah. A tortoise. You know what? I'm not a turtle doctor, so I'm not sure I know what the difference is between a turtle and a tortoise. But some people like to take a picture of this baby frog in their belly button. Now listen, I am not in the habit of showing belly buttons or belly button pictures, but when there's a cute frog in it, I can't help but maybe show it just a little. Look at how cute that thing is. I mean, look at those eyes on that thing. By the way, Discovery Magazine is printed by Apologetics Press. The April issue of Discovery, now the March one I think is about to come out. Maybe it's the March one. I get kind of confused with some of this, but it's coming out in the next month or so. The Discovery is on frogs. And listen, there are frogs you've never heard of that we talk about in Discovery, so you're going to want to see the Frog Discovery issue. Now, here is my favorite animal. This is my dog, Shadow. Now, he is a little older now. He's actually 14 years old, but he still looks kind of puppyish. He's a kind of a mistake. He's a half weenie dog, half Springer Spaniel. Someone had a Springer Spaniel. The neighbor had a weenie dog. The next thing you know, people come to VBS with some dogs. Everybody gives dogs away at Vacation Bible School, it seems. And that's where we got Shadow. That's what we call him. And they called him a spring weenie. I don't know. I don't think that's a real breed. I think they were just trying to, really glamorize this puppy. Well, now he's 14 years old. And there's one thing that makes Shadow kind of crazy. And that's when you give him peanut butter. He loves to lick some peanut butter. All right, so hey, I'm showing you a few slides here of these animals that are just, animals are just, I just haven't met many people that said, I just can't stand every kind of animal on earth. I mean, listen, if you like to eat, you at least like fried chicken, right? You like chickens. Can I tell you a fried chicken joke? All right. Yeah. Okay. So there was a kid who went to school one day, and they were talking about their favorite animals. And so, one young man, he said, well, I love dogs. And another young man said he likes cats. And then there was a young lady there that said she likes snakes, believe it or not. And then there was another young lady that said she loves bats. Now, there's a lot of bats out in Texas, but you better be careful with bats. And then they came to little Ricky, and Ricky said, I like fried chicken. The teacher was a member of something called PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So she sent Ricky to the principal's office, and the principal was not a member of PETA, and so he just said, hey, just go back to class and just be careful what you say. So the next day they talked about their favorite animals again. And she said, but today we're talking about our favorite living animals. And so she went around the room and she was talking to one young person and another student, and they all told, I like blue whales, and I like dolphins, and I like hippos. And they came back to Ricky, and he said, I like chicken. And she said, why do you like chicken? He said, because you can kill it and fry it. So I like chicken. She sent him to the principal's office again. And the principal was like, hey, come on now, Ricky, I know you like chicken, but let's be respectful of your teacher and her beliefs that you don't share about, the way to not eat animals and such. And so the next day he went back to class, and they were talking about famous people and who do you admire. And one student said, well, I admire what Abraham Lincoln did as the 16th president of the United States. Another person said, I admire Martin Luther King Jr. and what he went through and what he did during his life. And they came to Ricky and they said, Ricky, who do you admire? And he said, Colonel Sanders. Do y'all know who Colonel Sanders is? Okay. So there's my one of my attempts at an animal. Oh, I got another animal joke. What do you get when you cross a parakeet, or whatever that is, with a pig? You get a bird that hogs the conversation. Very good. All right. Yeah, I like that. Okay, what do you get when you cross a... uh-oh, what happened here? When you cross a fish with an elephant. You get swimming trunks. All right. What animal has more lives than a cat? A frog, because he croaks every night. All right. Let's move on. Do you know that in 8 of the first 9 chapters of the Bible, there are numerous animals that are mentioned? Listen, animals are not the main theme of the Bible. Okay, not in any way whatsoever. The main theme of the Bible is who? Who's the main theme? Jesus, God. The Bible is about God, His grace, man, humanity, and us messing up, sinning, and needing God's grace, and God's plan to fix man, to redeem man, to buy man back from a world of sin and the consequences of sin. And from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, throughout the rest of the Bible, that's the message of the Bible. The Bible is about the Messiah is coming, the anointed one, the one Jesus, the Old Testament telling us about He's coming. This is what you should expect. This is what you should look forward to. You know, He's going to be of Abraham, Isaac, of Jacob, of Judah, of Jesse, of David. This is the family He's coming from. He's going to be born not in Jerusalem, not in Hebron, not in Jericho. He's going to be born where? In Bethlehem, Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. And you've got all these predictions and prophecies, and the Bible is about Jesus coming, and the Bible is about Jesus being here. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Bible is about Acts through Revelation. Jesus is going to come back one day. This is how we need to live our lives and serve Him and worship Him until He does. That being said, the Bible does talk about a lot of things, including animals. There are a lot of animals that are mentioned in the Bible. And I would contend that it is very appropriate to talk about animals even when talking about God. You know that in Job chapter 38, God speaks to Job. Now, Job is a very interesting book. You are probably very familiar with Job chapters 1 and 2 and Job chapter 42. But there's chapters 3 through 41. How many chapters is that? About 38, 39 chapters or so? That most people know very little about unless they read through the book of Job, where you read speeches by Job, by his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu. And then there are 4 chapters in the book of Job where God speaks directly to Job out of a whirlwind. Okay? Exactly what that looked like, I don't know, but in chapters 38, 39, 40, and 41, God speaks to Job. And Job is wanting to know why he's been suffering. Why is this happening to him? And here's a great lesson for us young people, is that God did not tell Job everything we learned in chapters 1 and 2. At least there's no record of that. God talks to Job out of this whirlwind about his creation. He says things like, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know, or who stretched the lines upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? He talks about his universe, basically, in most of chapter 38. And then beginning at the end of chapter 38, all of chapter 39, most of chapter 40, and all of chapter 41, he talks about all those animals that you see. But he doesn't just talk about animals to be talking about animals. He talks about these animals for the purpose of Job recognizing how awesome their Creator is. And here is what's fascinating to me, young people, and such a lesson for us, is Job was suffering like no one I've ever heard of in my life. I mean, like, to that extent. 10 children lost in one day. All of his wealth lost in one day. And then he was one of the richest people on earth. And then he suffered immensely, physically speaking. And he got to hear directly from God talk about his creation. And I'm summarizing Job's response, but his response was basically, God, you are awesome. I am sorry that I was not being totally enamored with you before you spoke to me out of a whirlwind. In a sense, Job is saying, God, I have forgotten all my suffering because I have gotten this close to you, and you have allowed me to get this close to you by you reminding me of your authority and your majesty and your sovereignty over the natural realm that you create. So, having used Job as an example, I just want to say that there is a place and a time, even in worship, even in Bible classes, even in a school setting like this, to talk about God's amazing creation, especially as we consider the fact that design in the natural realm, complex functional design, demands a designer. Now, I have to admit, unless you're just so used to seeing giraffes, this is one of the goofiest looking animals on the planet. I mean, and I, if there was someone here today who looked like a giraffe, I would want to be more careful about what I said, but there's no one here today that looks like a giraffe. I like giraffes. I was in Africa last year about this time and got to go on a safari and see giraffes in the wild, and it's a really neat experience. But I mean, giraffes, look, they got long necks, long legs, long tails. They even have long tongues. Their tongues can reach 18 inches long. I mean, think about a giraffe. Their brain is about 8 feet higher than their hearts. And you say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, do you know what you need to get to your brain? You want to make sure you get blood to your brain. Because if you go very long at all without getting blood to your brain, then you are going to have serious problems and perhaps die. Well, in order to do that, I mean, this is 8 feet, maybe a 6 foot long neck and a brain, head on top of that, and your heart down here somewhere. And your heart, my heart is, I think, I've never seen it, but I think it's right around this area. Okay? If I saw it, I'm sure I'd pass out. But it's probably about a foot or so from my brain, which I've never seen that either. People wonder if I really have much of one. From my brain down to it's about a foot. So my heart is pumping blood up to my brain, and that's very important because blood circulates oxygen, and we need to get oxygen to our brains. Well, the giraffe has to pump blood not just a foot up in the air, but about 8 feet into the air against gravity. Can you jump 8 feet into the air? I doubt it. Some of you might jump, and be able to dunk a basketball or something. But, I mean, giraffes, they have, we hear a lot about blood pressure. Like my dad, he's 89 years old. I think he takes blood pressure medicine. But we talk about blood pressure sometimes like it's a bad thing. But if you don't have any blood pressure, you're not going to be able to survive. You have to have blood pressured in order to pump blood up to your brain. Sometimes we talk about, well, you've got high blood pressure or whatever. A giraffe has about 3 times the blood pressure of the average human being. Twice as much of about any other animal. Well, that's interesting because you have to ask yourself, what happens then when the giraffe bends its neck down? So let me ask you, now you're young, so it might not affect you like it would someone as old as me, but if I were to stand up here and try to touch my head to my knees, and I stay that way for 30 seconds or a minute, maybe try to make it 2 minutes, what's going to happen to me? Yeah, the blood, I'm going to pass out because the blood's going to my head. I'm going to at least get dizzy. Well, did you know that a giraffe can drink more water? Not that it's drinking water right here, but that it can drink more water in one drinking session than a camel can? So they can have their necks bent down much lower than their hearts. And think about the blood rushing to its brain. How does it not just, the goofy giraffe from Madagascar? How does it not just, pass out in a very clumsily way? Well, because the giraffe was not left up to time and chance and evolutionary processes over millions of years. The giraffe actually has an intricate valve system from its main vein, from its heart to its brain, that closes when its neck bends down. Well, wait a minute. Okay, if its valves closed, then how does it get any blood to its brain? And I mean, they can bend down for several minutes at a time and be on high alert. Like if they're going to a watering hole in Africa, they're bending down, they're watching out for alligators or crocodiles or lions. They can be on high alert with their head several feet below their hearts. Now the blood is not going to its brain. Well, God also designed this animal with this network of blood vessels right below the brain called the network of the carotid, or wonder net of the carotid, which slowly gives the brain just the right amount of blood until it raises its head back up and the valves there in its main vein are opened back up. Evolutionists admit that the giraffe has, they admit this, I've got the documentation there at the bottom, a complex pressure regulation system, unique valves that prevent overpressure when it lowers its head, a network of blood vessels that help stabilize blood pressure as the giraffe moves its neck up and down, and a heart powerful enough to send an adequate amount of blood 8 feet upwards against gravity. How do mindless, purposeless, random processes of time and chance adequately explain unique valves, the heart, lungs, and arteries all being just the right size, as well as a wonder net that keeps just the right constant blood pressure in the brain, whether the giraffe's neck is raised or lowered? Even more difficult for evolution to explain is how all of these sophisticated body parts came about simultaneously. Does that sound like something mindless, random, mutated, evolutionary alleged processes could make happen? It strains the definition of random, wrote one evolutionist. Anyone know what this is? Chameleons. You know much about chameleons?
Change their color.
With bulging eyes going in different directions at the same time, a laterally compressed body, a taco-like humped back, legs with no muscle definition, kind of like mine, funny-looking feet with fused toes, and a tongue that is twice as long as its body, chameleons are some of the most comical-looking animals on the planet. One species of chameleon has a nose that would rival Pinocchio's, while another looks like a baby triceratops with 3 horns growing out of its head. But don't let their weirdness get in the way of seeing their complex design and baffling abilities. A close look at tree-dwelling chameleons brings about visions of a tightrope walker, only better. One evolutionist called chameleons expert tree climbers. Why? Because they can climb easily, up, down, and across trees. They can balance their bodies perfectly on thin branches, not just while sitting or walking, but while actively hunting, mating, and even fighting other chameleons. These lizards have 5 tiny toes on each foot. 3 toes are fused on one side, while 2 are fused on the other. On its front feet, the bundle of 2 toes is on the outside, while the bundle of 3 is on the inside. Interestingly, this is reversed on its back feet, where the chameleon has a bundle of 3 toes on the outside and 2 toes on the inside. The chameleon's fused toes function sort of like tongs from your kitchen. Yet while tongs often feel awkward and are used in somewhat of a clumsy manner, the chameleon's strong split feet are precisely what they need to grasp and balance on the tree branches they call home. Speaking of balance, a chameleon's tail may be as important as its feet when it comes to living in trees without fear of falling. You've probably seen cute pictures of chameleons with their tails curled up tightly in a circle, but have you observed how they use their tails? Like possums and monkeys, chameleons have prehensile tails, which means their tails are strong and extremely flexible, able to wrap around and hold things tightly. Their tails function almost like a fifth limb, which can securely anchor them to one tree branch even as they lift their feet to grasp for another branch, all in a perfectly balanced manner. Consider also chameleons' built-in camouflage abilities. First, their normal natural colors of green and brown aid them greatly in blending in with their forested habitat of mostly greens and browns. Second, chameleons are often found crouching low and tightly against trunks, limbs, or leaves of trees so that at first glance, and perhaps second and third glance, you don't even notice them. Third, chameleons' bodies are sometimes shaped similar to various things seen in forest, whether a knotted limb or a leaf. One species is actually named brown leaf chameleon. Fourth, though you might think chameleons have a weird, nervous, rocking back and forth walk, they often use this strategic shifting motion to mimic the swaying of leaves and branches, especially as they're hunting their prey and do not want to be detected. Whether locusts, termites, or praying mantises, the prey of chameleons are no match for the lizard's lethal weapon, its tongue. Chameleons have the longest tongue-to-body size ratio of any animal on Earth, reaching lengths twice that of their bodies. Such a long tongue might sound awkward and clumsy. Imagine seeing a 6-foot man walking around with a 12-foot tongue. Chameleons' tongues, however, are anything but clumsy. When a chameleon sizes up its prey, it can launch its sticky tongue like a deadly weapon, similar to an archer releasing an arrow from his bow. Scientists have studied the tongue strikes of chameleons and measured them doing 0 to 62 miles per hour in 1/100th of a second. Their tongues are so fast, they're difficult for us to see at regular speed. One evolutionist admitted that the tongue of the chameleon is highly complex, an array of bone, elastic elements, and muscle, the end of which looks like a suction cup. Tongue launch is initiated by the recoil of elastic elements that were loaded by the muscle. In short, a chameleon's tongue functions like a catapult. But what good is a catapult if it can't strike its target? If left up to the blind chances of evolution, chameleons would have neither their highly complex tongue nor a way to launch it with deadly accuracy. Yet evolutionists acknowledge the pinpoint accuracy of the chameleon's tongue while also admitting chameleons are supreme, specialized predators that are designed to hunt. Whereas professional baseball players have excellent hand-eye coordination, chameleons have great tongue-eye coordination. That's right. Among the many well-designed body parts of a chameleon are its eyes, as funny as they look. A chameleon has the ability to move its eyes in different directions at the same time. It can focus on one thing with its left eye while looking at something totally different in the completely opposite direction with its other eye. A chameleon has nearly a 360-degree view of the world, which is quite helpful when it wants to keep one eye on watch for potential predators and another eye on watch for potential prey, all without moving its head. When chameleons see potential prey on a limb or leaf, they go into stealth mode and slowly make their way into striking distance. They then take their crazy-looking independent eyes, each with a monocular view of the world, and move both to look in the same direction with a perfect binocular view, focusing squarely on their target and with excellent depth perception. Last but not least, chameleons are probably best known for their ability to change colors. One moment a chameleon can be green, and then only a few seconds later it can appear red, yellow, blue, orange, black, and all at the same time. They occasionally change colors to blend into their surroundings or to regulate their body temperature. But most often, chameleons' color changing has more to do with communication with other chameleons. If they're defending their territory, trying to attract a mate, or telling a potential mate to go away, they'll change colors. A number of different brilliant colors. How do they do this? In short, under the first layer of pigmented skin, some chameleons, such as panther chameleons, have a thick layer of cells containing tiny crystals arranged in a three-dimensional framework. When chameleons want to change color, they increase or decrease the amount of space between the crystals, allowing for color differences, as different wavelengths of light are either absorbed or reflected. The effect? An array of beautiful colors. Evolutionists admit that chameleons have the abilities of expert tree climbers. With their highly complex tongues and amazing eyes, they are designed to hunt. What's more, they are said to have the remarkable ability to exhibit complex and rapid color changes. In truth, the general theory of evolution cannot rationally explain the existence of complex chameleons and their many amazing built-in abilities. Highly functional design logically, by definition, demands a designer, not millions of years of mindless mutations. Yes, chameleon complexity cries out for a creative creator. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. You know, the colors, yeah. I think mine would have to be the eyes. Just having one eye looking at something over here and another eye looking at something over there, that is one of my favorite parts of the chameleon. However, the cuttlefish also has some really cool eyes. I mean, they look like something out of a Batman movie, don't they? Look at those eyes. They have bluish-green blood. They can spew black ink out of their bodies like an octopus. I was about to say out of their Bibles, but they don't have Bibles, okay? And they also have 6 tentacles that you can see here, but they have 2 that they generally keep in their mouths that they can kind of roll out like a birthday party blower. You know what those are? And they can just roll them back in their mouths. But one of the amazing things about cuttlefish is, maybe the most amazing thing, are their camouflage abilities, including just being able to manipulate their skin. Like if they are swimming next to a rough rock or a barnacle, they can manipulate their skin to kind of look like those barnacles. Or if they're swimming next to seaweed, they begin to move their tentacles like the seaweed is moving. In fact, there were scientists who put cuttlefish in fish tanks, and they drew vertical lines on the fish tanks. And you know what the cuttlefish did? They began to move their arms this way. I mean, vertically in the fish tanks. And then they put them in different fish tanks, and they drew horizontal lines on those fish tanks. And the cuttlefish began to splay out their tentacles horizontally. But as cool as that is, kind of like the chameleon, these animals also can change their skin to the color of their surroundings. They can change to 40 different colors at a moment's notice. I don't even know 40 different colors. I mean, if you were to ask me to name colors, listen, we played this game the other day at my house. I think it was over the holidays. I think it was called something Hue. Hue as in colors. And, you know, I know red, blue, yellow, green, purple, brown, black, white. And my wife she knows all the shades. So she was really good at this game. I was not so good at it. This animal can change. I mean, it's on record, like scientists have studied this animal a lot. People who work with the military have studied this animal to try to improve their camouflage making abilities. The cuttlefish is some amazing creature. We need to remember what the psalmist said. This great and wide sea, in which are innumerable teeming things, living things, both small and great, O Lord, how manifold are your works and wisdom. You have made them all. Young people, the design argument for God is a real, logical argument. Premise number one, we would say, if the universe shows complex functional designs, then there must have been a designer. Premise number two, the universe absolutely shows complex functional design. We're just simply talking about a few really cool creatures today. And the conclusion is, thus, the logical conclusion is, thus the universe must have had a designer. You know, my good friend Kyle Butt, that I've worked with for the last 23 years, who came here a couple of years ago, he has debated some of the most well-known atheists in the world. In fact, I was watching a gentleman from the United Kingdom. He was waxing eloquently in defense of there being a God, and they showed a picture of the room, and three of the top atheists in the world were there, including Richard Dawkins, who we named earlier, Michael Shermer, whom Kyle just debated, and Dan Barker, whom Kyle debated about 15 years ago. Here's my point. Kyle has debated three of the most well-known atheists in America, and you know what argument he has used regularly in those debates? The design argument. That's just, it's a logical, compelling, easy to understand argument. You know that poems demand what? They demand a poet. A architecture, as we've already noted, demands architect. A car demands an engineer who engineered it, who designed it. It demands a manufacturer who manufactured it or helped bring it into existence. It's a logical argument. If I had more time, I'd talk about the amazing blue whale, the biggest creature we've ever known to live on the earth. But since I have a moment here, I will tell you about the duck-billed platypus. Now listen, this isn't Perry. This is not Perry the platypus. Have you heard of Perry the platypus? Yes. You know, scientists classify the platypus as a mammal, yet it's unlike any other mammal you've ever seen. It's the size of a house cat with fur thicker than a polar bear's. It can store food in its mouth like a chipmunk. It has a beaver-like tail and webbed feet like an otter. It has a bill like a duck and spurs like a rooster. What's more, it lays eggs like a turtle and produces venom like a snake that it releases through its spurs that are kind of rooster-like. If there was ever an animal called unique, it would be Perry the platypus. Maybe we could call him Harry the platypus. He's got hair thicker than that of a polar bear. But here's one of the coolest things about the platypus that most people don't know. This kind of clumsy looking bill that it has on the front of its body there, when this animal dives into streams and rivers, especially like down in Australia, well, they close their eyes. When they're hunting for food, they close their eyes. If I'm going to hunt for food, I'm not going to close my eyes. But they close their eyes and they close their ears. I mean, they don't use their fingers to do it. They can just kind of do it, okay? And they dive down into the water to look for food, like food as small as tadpoles. That's some of what they eat, tadpoles and worms and shrimp. Shrimp sounds pretty good, but they close their eyes, they close their ears. Well, how do they find it? Well, here's what scientists have learned, is that in their bill, they have a complex electroreceptor system that is able to detect the faint pulses of even tadpoles. Have y'all seen tadpoles? Y'all know how little tadpoles are? They can find them even when they are buried sometimes in the mud or under the sand a little bit, because it is they have such a sensitive snout. Does that sound like something that, it's just amazing to me when I think about how people have tried to categorize the duck-billed platypus. I can't help but think that God may have created this amazing animal just so that we could be humbled a little bit and say, now listen, you like your nice little mammal and fish and amphibian and reptile and bird categories. Let me just throw out the platypus out there. I mean, the platypus lays eggs. When we think of mammals, we don't think of egg-laying creatures, right? And if you ever want to look at something interesting, I won't talk about it, but just research how they feed their young after their young are born. How they feed their young is quite interesting. The duck-billed platypus is a wonder of God's creation. You read in Revelation 4:11, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. Oh boy, the hippopotamus. Do you want to see a little video about the hippo, or do you want me to move on to something else?
Yes, video.
Okay, all right. I have a little video. Let's watch this. My good friends at World Video Bible School created these. I'll let you all see. Not many animals have a name as fun to say as hippopotamus. I want a hippopotamus for Christmas sounds a lot more entertaining than I want a dog, a goat, or a cat for Christmas. The name hippopotamus means river horse, but of course they aren't horses. Hippopotamus comes from two Greek words, potamus meaning river, and hippos meaning horse, the order of which makes you wonder why the animal's not called potamus hippo. For whatever reason, the name hippopotamus stuck, and hippos have captivated people for thousands of years, and for good reasons. For one, hippos simply have a cute and funny look about them, kind of like a silly-looking pot-bellied pig, but tons bigger, literally. We may not normally think of huge, nearly hairless animals as cute, but hippos look like thousands of pounds of hilarious, lovable, huggable chubbiness. Their long, barrel-shaped, massive pot bellies are carried about on short, stubby legs. The largest hippos can reach lengths of 16 feet, weigh more than 9,000 pounds, and grow over 5 feet tall. With such big, blubbery bodies and short legs, you might not think hippos could run very fast, but in reality, they can move it. Hippos can trot on their stumpy legs at 18 miles per hour over short distances. When angry, they can reach even higher speeds, outrunning most humans. Hippos love the water. As long as lakes and rivers are around, that's where they spend most of their time. But they don't actually swim. They can't even float. They sink down into the water, trot along the bottom, and push back up for air. Sounds fun. Amazingly, hippos often sleep underwater. But how do they breathe? According to scientists, hippos are equipped with a subconscious reflex which causes them to automatically push themselves up to the surface for air at least every 5 minutes. Have you ever done a cannonball in a pool or a river and not held your nose? I don't recommend it. That shot of water up your nose can sting, take your breath away, and make you cough. And sometimes you can get excess water in one or both ears, which can cause discomfort, infection, and can make your hearing kind of muffled. Hippos don't concern themselves with getting water up their nostrils or in their ears. They have the ability to shut their nostrils and press their ears against their heads when going underwater in order to keep out most all of the water. What little water that might seep in, they quickly and forcefully expel from their nostrils and vigorously wiggle out of their ears upon resurfacing. Don't let a hippo's seeming adorableness deceive you. This animal is actually one of the most dangerous creatures on the planet. It's not that they're hungry hippos. They're just very territorial, especially in the water. Every year in Africa, hundreds of people who dare to get too close to these dangerous animals wind up losing their lives. Truly, one of the last places you would ever want to find yourself is in the jaws of a hippo. Though they are herbivores, that doesn't stop them from using their massive mouths and foot-long teeth to chomp down on nearly any animal or human that enters their territory, including crocodiles. A hippo's bite has been measured at 1,800 pounds per square inch. A hippo can open its mouth 150 degrees wide and then bite down with literal bone-crushing force. Neither lions nor crocodiles are any match for the jaws of this creature. If you lived in the blistering heat of East Africa and were out in the sun for very long, you would likely need a lot of sunscreen to moisturize and protect your skin. You would also want to take along some antibiotics, such as neosporins, so that if your skin cracks or you get a cut, you can properly treat your wound. Washing a wound in the dirty water in which hippos live would only worsen things. What do hairless hippos, at least mostly hairless, do to survive the hot African climate when they can't find much water? How does their bare skin not crack, peel, blister, bleed, and become infected during intense sun exposure? And when they do find water, how do any flesh wounds, perhaps from fighting another hippo, not get infected in bacteria-infested waters? Amazingly, these creatures have their very own built-in moisturizing antiseptic skin ointment factories. We're not talking about merely sweating salty water, which is cool enough and literally cools us off. Hippos produce and secrete a thick, oily fluid from special glands in their skin. The fluid is not mere sweat. Neither is it blood, even though some used to think so, since it turns red and then brown on the skin of hippos. It appears the ointment acts as a sunscreen, protecting hippos from harmful ultraviolet rays. Even more impressive is that the fluid functions as an automatic skin ointment. The neosporin-like fluid helps kill any harmful bacteria on the skin. It even protects the skin from becoming waterlogged when a hippo is in the water. If evolution is true, how did a hippo, or the alleged ancestor of the hippo, ever go from being unable to produce such a phenomenal fluid to making it? Does an animal just will such a thing to happen? Could you, if you wanted to produce your own neosporin? Do you really think our descendants could? The idea that hippos evolved this unique ability or any other doesn't make good sense. Design like that found in the hippo logically demands an amazing designer. All right, before we take a break, let me just remind you, we're going to go from hippos and chameleons, giraffes, to the word dictionary and design. Here's what I want to close with this. By definition, when you think of design, and people admit, unbelievers admit, hey, they will oftentimes, you know how we noted earlier that atheists will use the word create, but yet not believe in the creator? Well, they will use the word design, and they will use it a lot, in fact. I've seen it, I've read it, they use it a lot. I've got slides that if I had time I would show you where they've used it here and there. And yet the word design, by definition, notice, a particular purpose held in view by an individual or group, deliberate purposive planning, a deliberate undercover project or scheme. After defining design as a drawing, sketch, or graphic representation of a detailed plan, one dictionary noted that design may be defined as the purposeful or inventive arrangement of parts or details. And the point is, a design is preceded by definition. I mean, just by definition, it's preceded by a deliberate, purposive planning, a detailed plan, or an inventive arrangement. A design, by definition, cannot be the effect of random evolution, of time, chance, and unintelligent accidents of evolution. Design is the effect, logically speaking, of the purposeful planning and deliberate actions of an inventor or designer. When we think about creation, we think about the existence of God, it's logical. By definition, design demands a designer, and a designer with some, and in the sense of all of creation, you think of the creator, a designer with a fantastic amount of intelligence. All right, I tell you what, I don't know if we're ready for the break yet, or if we want to have maybe 5 minutes for questions. Okay, sounds great. So let's see what questions you have for us, or maybe have an appropriate comment. I'm happy to take those too. You all have been such a great. One thing I need from you all before the questions, I need you all to. Can I record y'all saying happy birthday to my son? Yeah. Can y'all say, okay, like on 3, I'm going to ask y'all to say happy birthday, Bo. Okay, can y'all say it loud? I know you don't know Bo, but if you can, that would be great. All right, so let me see if I can make this. I don't know if I can do this or not. I'm going to do it right up here. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday, Bo!
All right, yes, y'all. Don't think that's right. Okay, that should make up for me forgetting to give him a gift. All right, yeah, that's great. Don't forget the Legos. That's right. Okay, all right, so today we've talked about creation making sense and really dealt with one point. There's a lot of points that we could talk about. There's a lot of reasons creation makes sense, but we talked about one point. What was that point? That main point was matter demands a maker. We could add this second lesson to that, because you could also say that design demands a designer. Okay, so those are two fundamental, really easy to understand, and can be illustrated in hundreds or thousands of different ways, whether with a hippopotamus or a duck-billed platypus. Design demands a designer. I'm not talking about look up in the sky and you see a cloud and think, that looks like a half bunny rabbit, half tortoise or turtle. I'm not talking about like just imagining something. I'm talking about, hey, we can see if there is an animal that produces something in its body like neosporin, that cries out for a designer. That kind of thing doesn't just happen any more than the creation of neosporin just happened. So design demands a designer. Do you have any questions about anything we've talked about today? No? Well, you're very kind. What was that word you used earlier? Incredulous. How old are you to use such a cool word?
13.
13. Now, you may say, well, Eric, you're just not very smart. So not be using the word incredulous. That's incredulous of you to think, Anyway, let's see. Let me just mention this, since you don't have any questions, that some other very key points under creation making sense would be things like life, self-replicating. Life demands a life giver. Life doesn't just pop into existence from nothing. Whether a worm or a tadpole or a giraffe. Something else that we could talk about, but not going to take the time today, intelligence. Is intelligence real? If you're an atheistic evolutionist, it would seem to me, with all due respect to them, that they either have to say that intelligence is not real, or that intelligence came from nothing. Does that make sense? Or that intelligence came from rocks? Have you ever looked at your pet rock and said, thank you for my intelligence. Thank you for letting me understand that I can know what incredulous means, and I can use that word in a sentence. Thank you. We don't thank water and rocks for intelligence. Intelligence demands an intelligent creator. And you all are intelligence. Thanks for your good attention today. And I will hand this back over.
Right. Okay, yes. Okay, so at this time we are going to have a multi-purpose break. It will be a bathroom break. There is a coffee and hot chocolate bar set up. Please don't be kind. Don't push over each other. Some of you should go to the bathroom and some of you should get coffee first and then we should switch. It's not going to be like exactly that, but if everyone tries to do one thing at one time, it will take longer. I do have crumble cookie coming. It's not here yet. We'll make sure you get a cookie before we start back. But we're going to go ahead and start break. And please be respectful. There are the church custodian people who are working, so they've already so be respectful. If you make a mess, they're going to know it was you. So it is break time there's water, there's coffee, there's hot chocolate. If you're getting hot chocolate, the water is in the pot over there. If you're getting coffee, use the Keurigs. So anyway, you are dismissed. Keep our drinks in here. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you are.
Kid, just be quiet. Whatever they're teaching, that's what I don't care about. Hurry up. Name some stuff. No, they're not.
Okay, students, 5th through 12th graders, I need you to try to find your seat. I think we're going to wait and have our cookie afterwards because we have a lot of guests, and it's also time for us to get started back. So I have not forgotten, and you will get some, but you have your drinks right now, and it's time for us to get started, and I think it will be less chaotic than trying to share the portion that I intended for 5th through 12th graders with 2nd through 12th graders. So let's do it that way. So let's go ahead and find our seats. If you are waiting at the coffee pot and you can start listening, that's okay. But we'd like to have you join back at our seats. The part that that many are very excited about, and we actually have brought in some of our younger SACA Lyons to listen and be a part of this, is our Mr. Lyons has some information on dinosaurs and how those fit into the creation model. And so we do have our 2nd through 4th graders that have joined us. So please, I know y'all are starting to you've been sitting longer than they have, but please be a good example to our younger friends. So we have, we're going to get started here. And for those of you who are just joining us, Mr. Lyons has written 22 or more books. That's the ones I know about, or co-authored them. And he loves God, and he loves to tell God's story and how he is the creator, and he ties it into science. And so you're kind of jumping in here in the middle. Your teachers can also help fill in some of those gaps. And I know many of you have actually read some of his books. They're your textbooks in your classroom, and your teachers are going to take some books back to your classrooms today. So let's listen and hear what he has to say. Jack, do you have a question? What's that? Oh, okay. Can we do it after the session? Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Lyons. We've switched to a different microphone, so be patient with us if we need to adjust that. Just a minute. All right. Thank you, sir. Let's give him a round of applause if you can without spilling your coffee.
All right. I have talked to a lot of people in different places around the world, and one thing I have noticed is that so many people, whether young or old, have a lot of questions about dinosaurs. I was traveling to northern Illinois a few years ago, and I remember a gentleman and his wife picked me up, and he was a professor at the University of Northern Illinois, and he said, and I wasn't there to talk about this subject, he just said, Eric, I just have one question. He was a good Christian man. He just said, just explain to me about the dinosaurs. Tell me what's going on. And one of the reasons he and many, many other people would ask questions like that, just tell me about the dinosaurs, where they're coming from is, hey, I believe in God. I believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and yet I have heard over and over again that dinosaurs lived many millions of years ago, long before humans came on the earth. So explain that to me and how that fits with the Bible. More than anything I've ever seen, dinosaurs have been used as kind of an icon of evolution, a poster child of evolution. These are just some examples of how evolutionists and others have used them. They are, if I were to say, what is, let's see here. If I were to say, I'm trying to think of an example, what is it that, when you hear the word gecko, what animal do you think of? Lizard, and specifically the gecko. If I were to say Aflac, what do you think of? The duck. You see, the poster child of Aflac is the duck. The poster child of gecko is the gecko, or no, gecko is gecko, right? If I were to say there is an NFL football team down in Miami, and they are known as the Dolphins, well, you got, people, there are many people around the world, when they think of dolphins, they think of, Miami Dolphins. I think of the amazing animal that we call a mammal that swims in the ocean that's called a dolphin. When people who love baseball talk about St. Louis Redbirds, they're talking about what? The Cardinals, which is a what? A red bird or a baseball team, all right? So the red bird represents the baseball team. Well, for a lot of people, they just think of dinosaurs as just representing the general theory of evolution. I have with me a book that is a little older, so you probably haven't seen this exact one, but it used to be used all over the country, Evolution, Change Over Time. Either this book, which came from Kentucky, or the material in the book, same page layout, has been used from all the way from California to to the East Coast. In that book, it's a 100-page book for middle schoolers on evolution, and it teaches a lot of false ideas. It's 100 pages about evolution, and more than anything else you'll see in the book is, or are, illustrations of and information or misinformation about dinosaurs. You've probably heard of Bill Nye, the science guy. With all due respect, I might call him the pseudo-science guy, but he was on a YouTube Big Think video a while back, and he said, once in a while I get people that really, or that claim they don't believe in evolution. And this was his response. So my response generally is, well, why not? Really, why not? And this was his first kind of like reasoning. Here are these ancient dinosaur bones or fossils. He connected, why wouldn't people believe in hundreds of millions of years of evolution? Why wouldn't you believe that? Because, look at the dinosaur fossils. As if dinosaur fossils equals a belief in evolution. There's a book that's been around for a little while called Abusing Science, The Case Against Creationism. And it's a book that the renowned Stephen Jay Gould once called a brilliant book. And in it, Kitcher claimed that solid evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and humans living together at the same time, if that ever happened in history. He said that would shake the foundations of evolutionary theory because, of course, the dinosaurs are supposed to have been long extinct by the time the hominids arrived on the scene. By the time our alleged ape-like ancestors, and then us supposedly coming from them, by the time we all got here, dinosaurs allegedly were already extinct by tens of millions of years. So what about the dinosaurs? What about the dinosaurs? Well, let's begin with where I unapologetically begin. And that's with the Bible. If I'm talking to someone who does not believe in God, my first, I don't talk about dinosaurs first, to people who don't believe it. Now, if they want to, I'm happy to try to answer their questions. What I mean by that is, I don't know that talking about dinosaurs to people who say, hey, I don't believe in God, what about the dinosaurs? Well, I say, well, I tell you what, can we talk about God and the evidence for God first before we talk about dinosaurs? Now, if they would say, no, I want to talk about dinosaurs, well, I'll talk to them about dinosaurs. My point is that logically speaking, God and the existence of God, whether or not He exists, and we talked about that in our first hour here today about creation and the Creator making sense based upon what we see in nature in the natural realm, that it's most logical to talk about that fundamental truth and the evidence for God's existence. And then it's most logical, if you come to believe that, it's most logical to talk about whether or not the Bible is from God. On those 2 points, the existence of God and whether or not He exists, which He does based upon the evidence. I don't want you to believe that because I say it. I want you to believe that because that's what the evidence indicates. And secondly, that the Bible is the Word of God. If I'm talking to someone about a number of things and they don't believe those 2 fundamental truths, let's see if I can get this going again here. I think I got it. Let me just move on to, where were we? Is that where we were? Right here? Okay. If I can't get people to believe those 2 fundamental truths, then it might not be so productive to talk about the dinosaurs. Meaning, talking about God and the Bible precedes, logically, it should precede a discussion about dinosaurs. However, I'm not going to say I'm never going to talk to people about dinosaurs if they first won't talk about God and the Bible. All right? But I'm a Christian, and I believe that there is evidence for God's existence, and there is evidence for the inspiration of the Bible. I mean, the Bible is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, here's how I usually summarize it just to make it simple. But here is one reason, the one main reason I believe that the Bible is not from humankind, but is inspired by God. There is that to err, to make mistakes is human. But the Bible writers got everything correct about the past, about the present day in which they lived, and listened carefully. And even about the future. Do you know the future? Do you really know who's going to win the national championship next year? Do you know who's going to win does anyone know who's going to win the NCAA basketball championship on the guy's side and the girl's side? You don't. Now, you might make a guess, but no one knows the future. No mere human being knows the future. God told the future a number of times in Scripture. And there's archaeological evidence that those things that were written down about even future things, like the book of Isaiah. Let's say that someone says, well, I don't believe that Isaiah lived 700 years before Jesus. Well, we have physical evidence that Isaiah was around at least a couple of hundred years before Jesus. What do you mean by, well, there's been something found called the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example. And the most complete Dead Sea Scroll was a copy of the book of Isaiah, which even people who don't believe in God, they have admitted, scholars have admitted, this is like 150 to 200 years before Christ. Do you know what Isaiah predicted more than any other Old Testament writer? The coming of Christ. That they're fascinating things. So my point is this, he gave detailed information about what to look for when the Messiah came, and that was all predicted and fulfilled perfectly in Christ. Now, so I'm just laying some groundwork here and just saying this, that I believe with every fiber in my body, based upon the evidence that there is a God and the Bible is the Word of God. So based on those two truths, I begin with, when I talk about anything, including dinosaurs, well, let's go to what the Bible has to say. Now, again, you may say, well, Eric, what if you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in the Bible? Well, then let's talk about the inspiration of the Bible with them first, if possible. And if not, then hey, we can still discuss, as we'll look at the rest of our time here together, we can discuss a number of things about dinosaurs. But I, unapologetically, begin with, thus says the Lord. On day 6 of creation, God made land animals. That's what the Bible says. You might say, as some have said, well, that's just too easy, too simple. It's got to be more complicated than that. No, it doesn't. Yes, our God, there's no one who's smarter than our God. He is infinitely intelligent. He is omniscient. That is, He knows everything. He knows every thought you're having right now. He knows if you're looking at me saying, his face looks funny. He knows if you're thinking, his hair looks weird. He knows if you're thinking, I wish I wasn't here right now. Okay, now I hope you're not wishing that, but our God knows all of this, but when He revealed to us what He did at creation, He revealed it in a very simple way. And we can either believe it or not. He said, on day 6 of creation, He made land animals. So here's a question for you. Although there are extinct reptilian creatures that swam in the seas, like Kronosaurus and other creatures, at least we think they are extinct. We believe they are. There were flying reptiles that flew in the sky, like Quetzalcoatlus. Do you know how big Quetzalcoatlus was? He was bigger than some small airplanes. Quetzalcoatlus was big. Do you know another one? Pterodactyl. Okay, so strictly speaking, pterodactyl, pteranodon, Quetzalcoatlus, Kronosaurus, and other creatures that flew in the air and swam in the seas that were reptilian, they weren't strictly speaking dinosaurs, because by definition, but they were dinosaur-like creatures. By definition, dinosaurs, a word that was only invented less than 200 years ago. Before 200 years ago, you wouldn't be talking about dinosaurs because that word wasn't around, unless you were the inventor of the word. by definition, dinosaurs are land animals. So here's a question. On what day of creation were land animals created? Day 6. You may say, Eric, that's just, you're too simple, Eric, but I would contend that Brachiosaurus and your long-necked sauropod dinosaurs or other land-dwelling reptilian creatures were created on day 6. So here's a tough question, but I want you to think through this. On what day were human beings created? Yes? Okay, he rested on day 7, and right before that, hey, that's good though. You're thinking what? Day what? Day 6, right? Yeah, created Adam and Eve. I don't know what Adam and Eve looked like, but they probably didn't look like me, all right? They're, think about all the different beautiful people in the world, different skin shades and tones and different hair colors and eye colors. They all came from 2 people. That's what the Bible teaches. And they probably were a little darker than me and probably a little lighter than other people. So I don't know what Adam and Eve look like, but these are our representations today. The Bible says very plainly that God made land animals, and by definition that would include dinosaurs, and human beings on day 6 of creation. And if that were not enough, the Bible also tells us that this was right after he gave the command to labor, work 6 days, and rest on the 7th day. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and a little bit that was in them. No. All that was in them. I mean, that's what the Bible says. So do I believe that God made the ancestor of the lion, whatever that first lion kind looked like? Like the cow kind. There are a lot of cows, varieties of cows today. Or like my dog. I told y'all about my dog. He's a what? Spring weenie. Half Springer Spaniel, half weenie dog. He's a mutt. They just kind of dressed him up with that title to make him sound like y'all really need this dog. And they didn't charge us for it. And 14 years later, he's cost us not too much money. But the first dog probably didn't look anything like my dog. But he might have looked a little more like a wolf or a coyote or something. I don't know. But the dog kind was created on day 6 of creation. The first birds were created on day 5 of creation. In 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Well, where are dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, remember, even though the Bible does, as we talked about last hour, does talk about some animals, the Bible is not a book of taxonomy. It is not a book to tell us about every animal that's ever lived. You're not going to read about Perry the platypus in the Bible. You're not going to read about Andy the anteater in the Bible. Or you're not going to probably read about a number of other animals that we, like, I don't know if you're going to read about lizards in the Bible, but not necessarily chameleons, okay? So the Bible is not a book of taxonomy, so it shouldn't surprise us that there would be some or a number of animals that are not strictly mentioned. Furthermore, the Bible was completed some 1900 years ago and was fully translated into, for example, the language that I speak, English. By 1535, the English word dinosaur was not coined until 1842, less than 200 years ago. And that was more than 300 years after the first complete English translation. That is when that word came about. So, do you expect to see a word in a book if that book was made hundreds or thousands of years before the word? Like, I don't know. That doesn't make sense, right? Now, though most modern English translators have elected to omit the term dinosaur, such exclusion, leaving it out, doesn't necessarily mean that the Bible writers refrain from mentioning dinosaurs in general, as we've noted from creation, or maybe dinosaur-like creatures. Let me give you an example. We talked this morning already about God's speech to Job in Job chapters 38 through 41. In chapter 40, God speaks to Job about this animal known as Behemoth. And he begins to talk to Job. Again, this is God speaking to Job about Behemoth, which I made along with you. Now, a lot of people say that Behemoth must have been a hippo or an elephant. Now, some of you are expert at hippos now because we've looked at some of those this morning. And what's amazing to me is like Job is one of the oldest books of the Bible. And what I mean by that is the events in the book of Job, they probably occurred around the time, if not before the time of Abraham. Where do you read about Abraham in Genesis? Well, all the way back, Genesis chapters 11 and 12, really the beginning of Abraham there in terms of a little bit of the end of Noah's genealogy and the beginning of his, you see. And then the rest of the book of Genesis is about Abraham and his family. Well, Job, likely, because you never read about the law of Moses in the book of Job, so this was before Moses came along, and the age Job lived to be quite old, probably older than Abraham lived, and again, probably goes back to pre-Genesis 12 time. So that book goes back a long time ago, and the events in it, they do at least. And so to think that this animal has to be an animal that's still on earth today that hasn't gone extinct is just really an indefensible conclusion. But some people say that Behemoth was a hippo or an elephant. But wait a minute, the Bible describes Behemoth as eating grass like an ox. Okay, I could see that. See now, his strength is in his hips. And his power is in his stomach muscles. We already saw the pot-bellied pig muscles of a hippo. Elephants have some pretty big stomach muscles too. But then it says, God says, this animal, Behemoth, moves his tail like a cedar. Does that look like it moves its tail like a cedar? In fact, if God was going to describe this amazing animal to Job, Behemoth, which part, the front or the back end of the elephant, which one is a whole lot more amazing? The trunk. Like, okay, maybe I could see him saying, now Job, if the elephant's trunk hit you on the head, you would have to go to the hospital or whatever kind of medical treatment they had probably 4,000 years ago. You might die. Do you think Job was very concerned or scared of an elephant tail? Maybe an elephant leg or foot that if he stepped on you, you would die. But so it's kind of comical, in my judgment, just kind of weird that so many commentators and Bible footnotes are like, oh, well, this is probably the elephant, or most people would say, no, it's probably the hippo. Moves his tail like a cedar. In fact, I think I may have left this out of the video that some of you saw earlier, but if you want to learn about a weird way that the hippo uses its tail, maybe you can do some research on that, but I'll just say this. If you go to the zoo and the hippo backs up to you and moves his tail real fast, get out of the way. Okay? Get out of the way. Listen, he might move his tail in a rotated way that might sound and look funny, but it does not sway like a cedar. That's just, again, kind of comical. But there used to be animals on the earth that had tails that were 20. Some of them nearly 30 feet long, weighed thousands of pounds. That it is the one animal I can think of that would literally be appropriately compared to a swaying cedar. And whenever you read about cedars in the Bible, they're big and massive, and that's how the Bible talks about them. Furthermore, his bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God, we learn. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Doesn't really sound like necessarily an elephant or a crocodile. Excuse me, not a crocodile, a hippo. I've got crocodiles on my mind because the next thing we're going to talk about is an animal that people say is a crocodile. Furthermore, the ancients, they used to go out and have harpooning the hippopotamus day. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, he used trained African elephants in war more than 2,000 years ago when he fought those individuals crossing the Mediterranean into Italy. It seems quite odd to think that the behemoth was some kind of hippo or elephant. Sounds a lot more like some kind of long neck, long tailed dinosaur. But what about this other creature that God describes to Job, Leviathan? Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? That's called a rhetorical question, and the answer is supposed to be obvious. No, you can't draw out Leviathan with a hook. And God continues to ask Job various obvious questions or rhetorical questions that have obvious answers. And well, what is Leviathan? By the way, behemoth and Leviathan, those are just transliterated Hebrew words. They're not really translated because most Bible translators admit we don't really know for sure what these animals are. And my point to you for just a few moments here is it's very possible, I would contend very likely, that God was describing to Job a couple of dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures. Leviathan, what is Leviathan? Well, a lot of Bible footnotes, man-made comments, and commentators in their commentaries would say, well, this was a crocodile. All right, well, let's look through this for a second. Again, asking Job some rhetorical questions. Can you put a reed through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Maybe that fish you can, that you caught the other day at one of these great Texas lakes, but not Leviathan. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. Darts are regarded as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. You come at me with some bronze, I'm not going to say, oh, that's just a piece of rotten wood, that's not going to hurt me. But that was how mighty Leviathan was. I mean, it was as if pretty kind of invincible. Well, the ancients used to go out and hunt crocodiles. I'm not saying they aren't dangerous creatures, but they would hunt them, they would capture them. We even have evidence that they mummified them. Furthermore, this animal that God is describing to Job, his undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire or in the mud. Have you ever seen the underside of a crocodile? Is it like jagged pieces of broken pottery? No, it's more smooth. Well, this creature has basically skin on the undersides that are like sharp pieces of broken pottery that leaves pointed marks in the mud as it comes up out of the water and crawls or shimmies across mud. Well, then the crocodile's ancestor didn't have an underside anything like a crocodile. Now, there used to be a lot bigger crocodiles than there are today. That is very true. On earth there is nothing like him which is made without fear. I'm reading from the New King James here. He beholds every high thing. There is some Hebrew terminology here that is a little more difficult to translate because of the rarity of the words. But as you read through this, then you come to this next section, which again, let me remind you, this is not in a fairy tale book. This is in your Bible, and it's not Satan speaking, it's God speaking. It's not uninspired people speaking. You know, sometimes the Bible will record by inspiration untrue statements that others have made. You know, like when Satan tempted Jesus, or when Satan spoke to Adam and Eve, you shall not surely die, Genesis chapter 3, if they were to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, that was wrong. He was wrong about that. So it's a statement recorded by inspiration by a Bible writer quoting someone who was speaking in an untrue, false manner. We're not talking about Satan. We're not even talking about Job's friends who were uninspired, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and Elihu, or even Job himself. This is God speaking. And this is what God says about Leviathan. He says, his sneezings flash forth light. Well, that's kind of cool. And his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Okay? Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame of fire goes out of his mouth. Job 41, 18 through 21. God speaking to Job. And I don't have to ask you, I don't think, what this sounds like, do I? I thought all dragons were make-believe. You know, Dr. Hugh Ross, I'm sure he's a very kind gentleman. He is someone who believes in God but says that the creation took place over many millions of years and says that dinosaurs lived many millions of years before humans. In a book that he wrote called The Genesis Question, he said this about this animal we were just talking about. He said, no dinosaur ever breathed fire or smoke. Now, let's hit the pause button right here. Hit the pause button for just a moment. You know, whether someone is an atheist or a theist, an evolutionist or a creationist, this statement, with all due respect to Dr. Ross, doesn't make any sense to me. And here's why. Okay, follow with me if you will. If you are an atheist, then you believe that everything, as we talked about this morning, that everything came from nothing. Is that kind of hard to believe? You're like, you just have a universe that just pops into existence from nothing? They believe that complex, functional, self-replicating life came from non-life, ultimately. Does that sound like that's kind of hard to believe? Like no one's ever seen that happen? They believe that functional, complex design came from a non-designer. They believe that intelligence ultimately came from non-intelligence. They believe that if there is such a thing as morality, they would wonder about, that it came from that which is amoral. And so to think that, just from an atheistic evolutionary perspective, that maybe there could be an animal that could evolve. Listen, if something could come from nothing, if life could come from non-life, if design could come from non-design, if intelligence could come from non-intelligence, should it be very hard for an atheistic evolutionist to believe that, well, maybe some animal just kind of evolved the ability to spew something out of its mouth like fire and smoke? Does that sound like that? That would be like, no, that could not happen. Everything could come from nothing, but that could not happen. You see what I'm trying to connect here? Okay, so that shouldn't be too hard for the atheistic evolutionists to think that could happen if all this other stuff did. From a creationist, biblical, Christian perspective, let me just ask you this. Did God, this is how the psalmist said it, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of heaven by the breath of his mouth. He spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. The Bible indicates that God merely spoke the universe into existence. If God could do that, let me just ask you this. Would it be too hard for God to create a creature which He described Himself in Job 41 that could spew something out of its mouth that either literally was or at least looked like fire and smoke? Is that too hard for God? To quote the Bible, is anything too hard for God? No. So, with all due respect to Dr. Ross, this doesn't make any sense. He believes that dinosaurs were around tens of millions of years before the first humans. So he's saying this without any evidence for that. Furthermore, we have evidence that God made electric eels that can shock the daylights out of you and send you to the hospital. I don't recommend playing with electric eels. And if you want to see some cool video footage, watch the crocodile or the alligator down in South America chomping on an electric eel and just losing his life. Okay? God made an animal that could do this. God made an animal that could light up its back end. Now listen, I had my back end lit up a few times when I was a kid, but it was by my dad when he would take off his belt and he would say, "You and your brother are in trouble. Lean over, you get a few licks." I saw some friends. I had a woodwork teacher. Now, I know this may not be as politically correct today, but When I was in school back in the old days in Oklahoma, I had a woodwork teacher. You can put your hand down right now, okay? We'll try to get to you later with those questions. I had a woodwork teacher who he really tried to deter, bad behavior. And so if you misbehaved in a woodwork shop where there are like saws and you could cut off your finger, you have to be very careful. But if you misbehaved, he took that very seriously. Like, don't play around with this equipment here. And there were times where he would call someone into his office, which was in the middle of the woodwork shop. He would have the window wide open so everyone would stand around and watch your buddies getting licked on the backside. Just pow, pow. I know I don't necessarily recommend that, okay? I'm just saying when, we might have our back end lit up a few times, but not like the lightning bug. The lightning bug takes luciferin and luciferous chemicals that they have and combines it with oxygen. Do y'all have lightning bugs out here in Texas like we have in Alabama? Woo, I love a good lightning bug. I try not to kill them, but I love to catch them and hold them and just see them light up. It's just bioluminescent light is cool. Now, here's my point. God made the electric eel. He made a lightning bug. He made the bombardier beetle that can spew something out of its back end at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. 100 degrees Celsius, the point at which water boils. You can't do that, and I don't want you to try to do that, okay? I mean, it expels it like a machine gun. Pow, 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 pow. You don't want to mess with a bombardier beetle. But here's my point is this. God made bombardier beetles. He made electric eels. He made lightning bugs. To think that God could do all that, but no, he couldn't make Leviathan. That doesn't make a lot of good sense. I don't know what Leviathan looked like exactly. But maybe it was something like this. I don't know. We asked a Canadian artist by the name of Louis Lavoie to read Job 41 and just to the best of his ability try to illustrate what he reads. I don't know if this is what Leviathan looked like, but I think it's possible. It may have been. When you go home tonight and you read it a couple of times and just think, whoa. I mean, this doesn't sound like any animal on the planet today. And then when you consider history, not just what the Bible says, but when you consider history, most people do not know, and they do not really think about what I'm about to share with you. When you think about history, history tells us a lot of things. Let me give you an example. In Genesis 6, 7, and 8, you're going to read about the worldwide flood of Noah's day. Did you know that before Moses ever wrote that in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, that there was 1,000 years between the flood actually happening and Moses writing this? 1,000 years. What do you think people talked about between those 1,000 years? Noah and his family got off the ark. The flood was the biggest thing that had ever happened on earth since the creation of the earth. And Noah and his family, Joan of Arc, his wife. Do you know his wife was named Joan of Arc? Just kidding. Noah, his wife, their sons, Shem, roast beef, and Japheth. I'm sorry, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they got off the ark. Some of y'all just won't laugh at anything. I tell you what. They got off the ark with their wives, and they had children, and they had children, and then eventually you have the Tower of Babel, and those events in Genesis chapter 11, and what happened there, there was a confusion of languages, and people began to then fill the earth like God had commanded, and they would separate according to their languages, and they spread around there. And let me ask you this. Would it have been very natural for them to talk about the flood that they had heard about and heard their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents talk about? Wouldn't that have been natural? Like, there was this 40 days and 40 nights of rain that came down, and we all got on a big, huge, massive boat with a bunch of stinky animals, and we lived on this ark for a year, and then we got off the ark, and no one else was on the earth besides us and these animals. And the animals that were in the water, which did, those animals that survived the flood in the water. Do you know that even unbelievers admit, I'm talking about atheistic evolutionists, admit that there are literally hundreds of legends of a great flood that occurred thousands of years ago. Not a local flood, but a worldwide flood that even involved a few people getting on a boat with a bunch of animals. Those stories were told. Anthropologists have studied this, know this. Those stories were told. They were being circulated around the world during those 1,000 years before Moses ever wrote the complete and perfect account that God inspired him to write in Genesis 6, 7, and 8. Well, Eric, why do you mention that? Because I want you to think about stories, or what some people call legends. There are ancient stories of reptiles that sound a whole lot like dinosaurs. But they weren't called dinosaurs because that word was not even created until the 1800s. They were referred to as dragons. I mean, history records this. You can look it up. The term dinosaur was not coined until 1842. Ancients used the word dragon from the Greek drakon to refer to any large serpent or reptile, whether real or mythological, and whether they were water-living creatures, animals like pterodactyl that flew in the air, or land animals. They used the term that would be translated differently in different languages, but to use the Greek, drakon. Now, have some legends, dragon legends, maybe many, have they been embellished over time? Yes, absolutely. However, such exaggerations do not negate the overriding truth that you're going to look at here in just a moment, that fearfully great reptiles, this is the definition of, this is what the word dinosaur means. It comes from two Greek words, dinos and sauros, meaning fearfully great or terribly great reptiles, of many different shapes and sizes, and that they once lived with humans. Let me just mention this. There's all sorts of exaggerations that even preachers exaggerate sometimes, okay? I exaggerate. You know, I can tell you stories about when I was a kid and a dog chasing me, scared me to death. I rode my bike as fast as I could. I, got in the house just in time and turned around. Here's this big, and I like dogs, by the way, but this one scared me. I've probably exaggerated that story. Oh, he was right on my heels. He was about to eat my foot off of my leg. I don't know. I was in Alaska one summer. I was living up there one summer when I was in college, and I had seen a video of a moose, like a real video footage from the news, I guess it was, of a moose. He was kind of blocking a doorway into a university, and someone tried to get into the door around him, and he wasn't having it. Maybe it was a mama moose, I don't know, cow, I guess they would call it. And the moose trampled the person to death. Well, a few days later, I'm riding my bike, or the bike I was borrowing, in downtown Alaska. Now, in the summertime in Alaska, the moose, they come out, and they're like all over the place. Of course, they're all over the place throughout the year. And I'm riding my bike, and I turn around, I stop, and I see a mama moose and one or two babies with her. I'm just viewing it from afar, knowing I had just seen this video, and like, hey, moose can be dangerous creatures, be careful. Well, then there comes this, and I'll just call him kind of a crazy guy. He's on rollerblades. He's just flying down the sidewalk, and he gets within a few feet of that moose and kind of spooks the moose, who then raises its head and it felt like looked right at me and started charging. And I took off on that bike. My goal was to get away from the moose as fast as I could, or at least outrun the other bikers, which probably was not too courageous of me. Now, I've told that story, and it's a true story. But have I probably embellished it through the years? Kind of like, do we have any fishermen in here? You ever caught a fish that might not have been quite as big as you thought it was, or maybe said it was? Does that mean you didn't catch a fish? Does it mean you've never seen a fish? Does it mean you've never been fishing? Or does it mean that you can tell stories that you might intentionally or unintentionally exaggerate sometimes? You see, just because there are stories that have been embellished doesn't mean there's not some serious grain of or nugget of truth. Here is what atheists and theists, creationists and evolutionists, both admit. And that is that like Carl Sagan, one of the most well-known atheistic evolutionists of last century, yea, that long, long time ago, the 1900s that some of us know a lot about. He said, the whole dragon thing, it's not a Western anomaly. It's not like, hey, we only know about this in the West. He says this is a worldwide phenomenon. Why would this atheist say this? Because he knows that people all over the world have talked about literally seeing dragons. Now, not today necessarily, but hundreds or thousands of years ago. This atheist, Carthan, says dragons are found in the myths and legends of cultures all around the world, which begs this question. Why do you say they are myths and legends if they are found all over the world? It's assumed, well, these must not have been real creatures. Here's Daniel Cohen, an evolutionist, who nearly 50 years ago said people all over the world have believed in dragons. To which I would ask this question. Why? Why have people all over the world for thousands of years believed these creatures? This next quote I'm going to show you here, this is the very opening statement of a video that was put out by Animal Planet just a few years ago on dragons, put out by pro-atheistic, pro-evolutionary source. Just want you to read or hear what they said in this video. Again, they make our point for us. There is one creature remembered in the legends of almost every human culture that's ever existed. A creature depicted with remarkable similarity by the, by the Chinese, the Aztecs, even the Inuit who live in a frozen land where no reptiles are found. Even they have stories of this animal, the dragon. Cultures from different continents, people who had no contact with one another, yet all of them have stories describing the same, what they call mythical animal. But that begs the question. All of these unbelievers, and by that I'm putting atheists and evolutionists in this category, they say people all over the world have believed in these creatures. And the logical question I would ask, I think it's a logical question, is, well, why? Why did people all over the world who had no contact with one another, he says, why would they believe? And not only that, this is a worldwide thing, and it's a worldwide thing that goes back literally thousands of years. So say not just creationists, but atheists and evolutionists. Samuel Kramer wrote in History Begins at Sumer, the dragon-slaying theme was an important motif in the Sumerian mythology of 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. In that video that I just quoted from Animal Planet, they also indicate that this is the animal which humankind has, throughout our history, been most compelled by. This animal. Well, why have people all over the world, thousands of years ago, talked about this animal, so say unbelievers. Science Digest, a pro-evolutionary magazine, said several years ago, dragon legends have been with humanity since the dawn of recorded history. And the logical question would be, why? Why did people all over the world, for thousands of years, from different continents, different places, different cultures. And I've given you, some evidence for that. I'm talking about like those who would disagree with me about there being a God and the Bible being the Word of God say, yeah, this has been talked about all over the world by all sorts of cultures. People who didn't have contact with one another back thousands of years ago, they all talked about seeing this animal. And these were some of the characteristics, how they described this animal. Well, some of them had scaly, hard, elongated bodies. Some had long serpentine-like necks. Some had enormous tails and stout legs, horn, knobby, or crested heads, fearsome teeth, claws, and spikes, with or without bat-like wings. Some with these membranous wings, some without them. Some went on 2 legs, and some went on 4 legs. according to all these stories that have been found all over the world going back thousands of years. What do these sound like? The new Encyclopedia Britannica, which is not so new as far as the 1997 edition, referred to dinosaurs as gigantic prehistoric dragon-like reptiles. Yet the encyclopedia was careful to say that the dragon legends apparently arose without the slightest knowledge on the part of the ancients of these real animals. Why would someone, again, we only began, let me just say this. The word dinosaur was coined in the 1840s. We only began learning about dinosaurs from the fossil record in the early to mid 1800s. So why would, get this, so here's an encyclopedia that is talking about dinosaurs, and they say, well, they're dragon-like creatures. Why would you say that if they had no similarities whatsoever? Dragon stories or legends have been around long before we learned about dinosaurs from the fossil record. Daniel Cohen, the evolutionist Daniel Cohen, in his book, The Greatest Monsters of the World, he said no creature that ever lived looked more like dragons than dinosaurs. There was a dinosaur that was excavated in South Dakota 20 years ago. Here is a replica of it that is, you can see at the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, Indiana. There it is. Do you see something interesting about the name they gave this creature? Draco Rex. What does Draco sound similar to? Dragon. They named this dinosaur, which they excavated from the ground in South Dakota, they named it Dragon King. Why would you do that? Because what's the obvious answer? Because it looks like a dragon. In fact, one placard in the museum reads, when we saw this creature's head, we weren't sure what kind of dinosaur it was. Its spiky horns, bumps, and long muzzle looked more like a dragon. This was not some kind of kooky, crazy, Eric apologetics creationist saying this. These are the comments that were made by the individuals who excavated this creature. It looked more like a dragon than a dinosaur? But you're saying it's a dinosaur. Yes, but we named it Draco Rex. It's a new type of dinosaur, they said, that looks like a dragon. So before I go to this next slide, let me just say this, and I thank you all so much for hanging with me for a little bit. Let me see how much time maybe I have left, maybe a little more time here. So, if these stories of dinosaur-like creatures that could not have been called dinosaurs because that word didn't even exist, if they sound so much like dragons and dragons sound so much like dinosaurs, again, knowing there has been embellishment through the centuries, and if these stories go back thousands of years ago, and they've been found all over the world, what is the explanation for that? So there was an atheistic evolutionist, a very determined atheistic evolutionist by the name of Kurthan, who is one of the few atheists I've ever heard address this. And so he wrote this article on, where dragon legends must have come from. And he gave all these, maybe it was from, people seeing lizards on the ground. Maybe it was from this or that. Top 10 reasons or top 10 possible, things, possibilities of where dragon legends came from. This was his number 3 explanation. And he believes that dinosaurs and humans are separated in time by millions of years, which we're not, okay? But that's what the evolutionary theory says. So he believes that, but this is what he said. This was his number 3 explanation in the article. He said, hopefully it'll come back on the screen here. He said, of all the creatures that ever lived, pterosaurs probably most closely resemble the dragons of European legend. What? Reptilian and featherless, pterosaurs flew on wings of hide that were supported by a single long and bony finger. The smallest pterosaur was the size of a sparrow, while Quetzalcoatlus, named after the Aztec god, had a wingspan of more than 40 feet, making it the largest flying creature ever known to humanity. Of all the creatures that ever lived, pterosaurs probably most closely resemble the dragons of European legend. What he's saying is, people for thousands of years in Europe have talked about these creatures flying and disturbing people sometimes, and people seeing them and talking about them. And these creatures that we say, that evolutionists say went extinct 60 million years ago, that they sound more like these stories of people living with them, seeing them, than anything else on earth. That's what he said. He's not a creationist. He's not even someone who believes that there is a God. But then he went on to say this. His number one explanation for dragon legends. This is what he said. To people living in ancient times, a comet streaking through the skies with an icy tail millions of miles long would have closely resembled such a creature. If comets were the inspiration for some dragon legends, it could help explain why dragons are ubiquitous in the myths and legends of so many different cultures in all corners of the world. To which I would just ask, which one of those looks more like a dragon to you? You know, several years ago, my two sons and I, they got through with an indoor soccer game, and we were driving down the road. It was already after dark. It was a winter time, and, you know, I don't know if it was 8 or 9 o'clock at night. It was dark, and all of a sudden, this is a true story, we're driving down the road, and I see out of my window, the driver's side window, what looked like a huge bottle rocket just flying through the sky. Like it was a streak of light, and then it quickly turned into this huge ball of fire, and then it disappeared. And I thought that, I mean, to this day I remember that. My sons in the car saw it. We're like, that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in the nighttime sky. It was really neat. I didn't know what it was. At first, I honestly thought, that's like a bottle rocket flying through the sky, and then it turned into a huge ball of fire and then disappeared. And so I do what we oftentimes do. I went home and I Googled, like, you know, anybody see something flying through the sky, whatever. And people in Florida, in Georgia, in Alabama, where I live, in Mississippi, in Louisiana, in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, saw this meteor or meteorite that, from what I understood at that time, landed somewhere in Oklahoma. But let me just say this. Do you know what no one in my car said that night? Oh, that looks so much like a dragon. No one said that. It was just this cool thing that flew in the sky that we saw for about 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Some of the conclusions and explanations that atheistic evolutionists give for some of the things that we know based on the Bible and based on history have to tell us is quite concerning, I will just say. The logical explanation truly is that God made these creatures along with humanity thousands of years ago. They lived together. Though we don't have to, it's not like man had to live right next door to them after the fall of man. They could, well, let me ask you this. Are there lions and tigers and bears that live all over the place? Sure. Do I want to live next door to a polar bear? No. No, not at all. You know, when I was in Africa last year, I got out of the vehicle. We were about to start this safari, and one of the first things I saw on the ground was a huge python. I just wanted to get back in the car. Yeah, it was cool, but I didn't want to be eaten by a python. And then, you know, we go a little ways and we see not just one lion, but like a family of lions And I didn't even know lions got in trees, but they were in a tree, sleeping. I kept my distance from them, like stayed in the vehicle kind of distance. A little while later, we see a cheetah in the middle of our little path that we were driving through, and it was just on high alert, looking like it was on a hunt. My point is this. There are dangerous animals that live on the earth today, but generally speaking, people have learned to keep their distance from them. Could people have not done that? I mean, killer whales? Do you keep your distance from killer whales? I hope so. Hope you try to. You know, I know there's some people, though, they have trained some of them. Is there still a SeaWorld in Texas? Yeah. Now think about that for just a moment, young people. Killer whales have been trained by human beings, some of them, to do all sorts of funny things that you can go to a show and laugh about. Now, doesn't that sound kind of weird? Like, wait a minute, killer, like we don't just call them orcas, we call them killer whales for a reason. Did you know that killer whales eat thousands of pounds of not only fish, but mammal meat? I mean, like killing other whales and dolphins. And I've even read and watched on television where they talked about and informed us that they sometimes eat moose that get in a waterway where there are killer whales who will smell them, see them, find them, and eat them. It's funny to me that people, in fact, one day we got a call at Apologetics Press about our dinosaur book. Some of you might have it or seen it. It's been updated. It's now about 200 pages. And we had a phone call from a gentleman who's a Christian. And he said, I can't believe that you would show people, living at the same time with and showing, humans and dinosaurs living together. And I just said, well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that humans live with alligators and crocodiles? Yes. Do you believe that Noah was on the ark with them? Or other animals? Well, they may have been in the water, I guess. But how about bears and lions, tigers, and other creatures that might bite your head off? Do you believe that? Well, yeah, I believe that. Does that sound kind of like, how did that happen? Do you believe that people have trained, the largest land animal that lives on earth today is the African elephant? You believe that people have trained African elephants to do? So, why is it so hard for people to believe that human beings once lived with various kinds of dinosaurs? There are even people who swim with whales, y'all. Like in the open ocean who swim with sperm whales or blue whales. Blue whales are the largest animal we've ever known to live on the planet. They can weigh nearly 400,000 pounds. They have a tongue that about maybe 15 or 20 of our youngest ones here today could stand on at one time. They have a heart so big that it's bigger than some small little, the little mini cars. Your dog could probably crawl through the largest vein or aorta in the whale's heart. And yet human beings not only live on the same planet with them, they sometimes have been out in the ocean to swim with them. Those things aren't too hard to believe, but it's too hard to believe that dinosaurs and humans once lived together. Finally, in just the last part of our time together today, and then we'll have time for questions. I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and take a question here, and then we'll get to some of this. Yes, sir?
Aren't sperm whales the one that eats the giant squid?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not an expert on sperm whales, so I don't know. Maybe they do. I mean, we have Miss Incredulous over here who would say, she's answered that question for us. Sorry for those who weren't in here. She just used a big fancy word for us. Okay. Yes, sir. I think that the question was, did the Israelites ever fight dinosaurs? There is a passage, I can't remember right offhand, I think we have it in our dinosaur book, where there is discussion of, in fact, it's Josephus says this. Josephus was not an inspired writer, but he mentions, there's Joseph. I'm getting this a little confused. Sorry, off the top of my head. There's Josephus and there's the historian Herodotus, and they both speak of these flying reptile, snake-like reptilian creatures, but they were talking about smaller ones. So if they talked about it, the historian from about around the 4th to 5th century BC and a Jewish historian who was talking about during Moses' time, there were these things. Those are two uninspired people, but they talk about people seeing them. So I don't think it would be too crazy to think that that may very well have been the case. Plus, you do have the passages we read earlier from the time of Job of these two amazing creatures called Behemoth and Leviathan that sound very much like, if not literally were, a long-necked, long-tailed dinosaur and some kind of dinosaur-like water-living reptile that was huge and almost invincible. Good questions. Anything else before we move on? Yes, sir. Is there what? Acids. Yeah, you've been watching some movies there, haven't you? Now, that's a good question, though. You know what? We have God telling us in the book of Job that there was a dinosaur that could spew something, or there was some kind of water-living creature that looked like and sounded like some type of dinosaur-like creature that spewed something out of its mouth that either literally was or at least looked like fire and smoke. So I don't know the answer to your question. I will say, be careful believing everything you see and watch on TV and in the movies. I'll give you an example. Jurassic Park, I believe it was in the first or second Jurassic Park movie, they made velociraptors appear about 400% larger than what they really were based upon the fossil record. Okay? So there are a lot of things about dinosaurs that people think. I'll give you another example here, just broadly speaking. I'll get to y'all in just a minute, okay? There are a lot of things we think we know about dinosaurs that people don't really know. Let me give you an example. This comes from the Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences, probably 15 or 20 years ago. They indicated that all dinosaurs that have ever been named, that 45% of all dinosaurs that have ever been named, they have been named after finding only one fossil specimen. Think about this. Let's say that Eric is just a skeleton, and you were to take my little, one little part of my pinky, and you were to hold up that pinky and say, this, you didn't know what I look like. You just know this was all that you found on the ground, my little tiniest pinky bone. How would you know what I look like just from that? You wouldn't. And yet, you see, a lot of people have named a lot of dinosaurs and they've talked about a lot of dinosaurs, but even nearly 75% of all dinosaurs have been named from 5 fossil specimens or less. Okay, so just be careful thinking that we know a ton about specific dinosaurs when we may not have near the fossil evidence that people would claim that we have. You want me to keep going or pause? Yes, thank you for being with us today. All right. Giganotosaurus, yes. In fact, there's a replica of Giganotosaurus in the Fernbank Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, which is pretty cool. The question was Giganotosaurus. Well, the first time I saw that, I thought it was Giganotosaurus, but it's actually pronounced, I was corrected by the woman at the museum telling me it's Giganotosaurus. Like, okay, sorry, got that wrong. But notice our second grader knew the correct way to pronounce that particular dinosaur. Any other questions before we move on? Happy to answer any that you have. This is very interesting to me, and I'm curious, I'd be curious to know how many of you have heard this. Maybe you have. But a few years ago, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who is a professor at North Carolina State University, she and some of her colleagues, they were excavating a T-Rex out west, and the T-Rex bone, I believe it was a femur, was so large and so heavy that they couldn't get the whole thing on the helicopter, so they intentionally broke it into various pieces. which normally, if you find a fossil, like I have a few, at least one or two little dinosaur fossils in my office. They're small. You can't really tell what they are. They're just pieces of a dinosaur. Now, would I rather have like a whole bone that has not been broken? Generally people want the whole fossil. A piece of an arm or a leg or a rib. That'd be so cool. And so people don't necessarily just clamor for and want little broken pieces of fossils. Well, they needed to, and so they put it on the helicopter and flew away, and then they began to study these dinosaur pieces that have intentionally been broken. And this is what was reported in Science magazine a few years ago. Soft tissues are preserved within the hind limb elements of Tyrannosaurus rex. Removal of the mineral phase reveals transparent, flexible, hollow blood vessels. Some regions of demineralized bone matrix are highly fibrous, and the matrix possesses elasticity and resilience. Sounds kind of like me right there. Elastic. Don't have a lot of bone, a lot of muscle, but I got a little elastic in me. Not quite as resilient as she's talking about a dinosaur. She is an evolutionist who's talking about a dinosaur bone, and she writes, the demineralized fragment is flexible and resilient, and when stretched, returns to its original shape. Would you like to see a picture of it? Demineralization of femur and tibia fragments revealed the preservation of fibrous, flexible, and apparently original tissues. How old did they say T-Rex is? Like 70 to 80 million years old? You think you're going to be seeing this tissue 70 to 80 million years from now? I hope not. And apparently original tissues as well as apparent cells and blood vessels. This is T-Rex inside the T-Rex bone. This looks like the chicken I had the other day. Right here, look at this. Look at this. She is stretching some of the tendon, or not tendon, whatever matrix there is inside of the bone. The tissue, right. Just curiously, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, I'm just genuinely curious, how many of you, tell the truth, how many of you knew about this already? Okay, there were a few of you. That's good. That's a lot more than what sometimes I'll ask that question, and there are places I go, especially when there are a lot of adults. It's funny, young people tend to find out about this more than the adults, or hey, I've learned it maybe because of your interest in dinosaurs, but I was speaking out west, I think in Arizona a few months ago, and asked them, how many of them have heard about this? And as I recall, it was a room, maybe not quite as many as are here today, but almost, and not one of them, as I recall, had heard of this. This is fascinating. You're telling me these creatures lived tens of millions of years ago, and we still got this around today? Does that sound logical to you? Does that sound like, oh yeah, I can totally see that? Here is an electron micrograph of a portion of tissue being stretched from a Thescelosaurus. And this actually comes from some creationists from the Creation Research Society. Look at the stretchiness of this tissue. And here's what's amazing. Now, I say breaking news. By breaking news, I just mean most people don't know this either. That this was not an anomaly. It wasn't just like a one-time thing. That they're finding what I've just shown you on the screen. They're finding this all over the world. Like dinosaur fossils they're finding all over the world that supposedly go back 70 million years ago. Alan Boyle reported a few years ago, he said, today paleontologists are still stunned not only to find material that looks like dinosaur cartilage, blood vessels, blood cells, and bone cells, but to see the stuff in so many different specimens. He said there are a growing number of tissue samples. It's not just a fluke occurrence. It's something that's more pervasive in the fossil record. You mean, it wasn't just this Mary Schweitzer, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she didn't just find this and it was like a one-time thing, just a fluke occurrence. No. They've excavated a T-Rex, reported by MSNBC a few years ago, and a hadrosaur from Montana, a Titanosaurus from Madagascar, and more sample fossils that fossil hunter Jack Horner is finding in Mongolia as well as Montana. Wait a minute. Mongolia? Where is that? What continent? Asia. Look at y'all. I tell you, good. All right, we got Asia, we got North America, Madagascar. What continent is that? You know the Madagascar movies. Y'all know what continent that's on. Africa. This is representative of places all around the world. Regarding the hadrosaur specimen found in Montana, Dr. Mary Schweitzer stated, it's the freshest, if you will, dinosaur bone that has ever had this scientific analysis conducted on it. Does fresh and 70 million year old dinosaur bone, does that go together? I mean, is that like complementary or does that seem contradictory? Yeah, contradictory. Does this sound a lot more like biblical creation time than tens of millions of years ago, long before humans allegedly evolved from ape-like creatures? Dinosaurs roamed the earth. And then for 70 million years, their bones stuck around. See, these bones are not completely fossilized. Like they still have... Here's the thing, young people. This is kind of... I mean, it's not, but a little bit kind of surprising to me. I was going to say kind of hard to believe, but it's surprising to me even from a creation biblical timeline of a few thousand years. Like, for something to last 6,000 to 10,000 years, that's pretty phenomenal preservation. But there is a world of difference between a few thousand years and not hundreds of thousands of years, and not 1 million years, not 10 million years, but 70 million years. That is a world of difference. I mean, they said what we're finding is absolutely incredible. Yeah, it really is hard to believe. Amazing preservation. The Baltimore Sun got wind of this a few years ago, and they said miraculously, they called it miraculously preserved soft tissue from the femur of a 68 million year old T-Rex. But atheistic evolutionists don't believe in a miracle worker. So they don't, they're saying this tongue in cheek. They're not being real serious here. They don't believe that this is some kind of miracle, and I would contend if it has been preserved for 68 or 70 million years, you would surely need that's really kind of the implication. You would need a miracle for that to happen. But they don't believe in the miracle worker. And plus, God doesn't just work miracles. He did not in Bible times just to entertain people. There was a specific purpose for those miracles. They were confirming, God used those miracles to confirm the message that His people, including Jesus when He was on earth, preached. I don't know if you've watched the Chosen series, but one of the things I do appreciate about the series, among many, but there's one thing I like, is they do show that Jesus did not inaccurately show. He didn't just perform miracles for the purpose of just being nice to everyone. It shows Him going to the pool of Bethesda and He healed that one lame man. His purpose, even though He had the power, His purpose was not to heal everyone's physical diseases. The Apostle Paul, one of the greatest missionaries the world has ever known, had some kind of ailment that he just generally referred to as a thorn in the flesh. We don't know exactly what it was, but that he tells us in 2 Corinthians that he pleaded with the Lord 3 times for that to be removed. This is a man who, by the power of God, worked miracles. And he couldn't work a miracle on himself. He didn't work a miracle on himself, and God didn't heal him, at least not at that time, of this. Why? Because God's purpose in working miracles is not frivolous, and it's not to preserve some dinosaur bone, not that he's being literal here. The purpose was to confirm the message, to prove that Jesus is the Son of God, to prove that the message that the apostles were preaching, that this was from heaven. We don't see people reattaching severed ears today like Jesus did to Malchus. We don't see people raising the dead like Paul did to Eutychus falling out of a window. Some of y'all better be careful today. Y'all about to fall out of a window, okay? But that's not because God can't work miracles. It's because He chooses in this day and time not to work them like He was for the purpose of confirming the Word in Bible times. Soft, fibrous, flexible, stretchy, resilient, fresh. Dinosaur bones are, wait a minute, 70 million years old? Perhaps this fresh dinosaur tissue is strong evidence that dinosaurs are not 70 million years old. I can go on a little longer, but let's pause here and just say, hey, do you have any questions at this point before I go on, or I'm told to stop? I've been told I have until about 12, and I'm happy to go right up until 12, but I'm also happy to answer any questions you have. Well, then I'm going to keep going just for a few more minutes here. Like, what is this? Guy's not a dinosaur. Who is this? Okay, well, let me just say this, or ask this. When you go, let's say that some of you have been on vacation somewhere, and it's somewhere you've never been, and you go with your family, and then you come back to school. Now, you don't have to go on vacation. A lot of times, I just played baseball during the summer. I didn't get to go on many vacations, and that's okay. I mean, I did go on some, much more than I deserved, but you come back from going to the Grand Canyon, or going to, I don't know, Canada or Mexico, or Oklahoma, one of the greatest states in the United States of America, okay? Yeah, no one's ever said that before, have they? Okay. And then you come back. Let's say that you had an amazing vacation. The things you saw, the things you experienced. Now, when you come back to school and you're sitting with your friends at lunch, what is something you might tell them? What? Here's my point. There are 2 things that for thousands of years people have done when they have seen and witnessed some amazing things. They tell stories, and they show pictures. Or they draw pictures of what they have seen. Those 2 things people have been doing for thousands of years. I've already mentioned a couple of times I went to Africa last year, and I was teaching in a Bible school for a week. And when I got back, I had to go by myself. My wife didn't go with me, and I would have preferred that. So I went by myself, and I came back. And I came back with 2 things. Came back with stories, and I came back with pictures. Do you think I have a picture on my phone of those lions in that tree I was telling you about? I sure do. I can show it to you if you want to see it later. And so, pictures and stories. Well, people have been doing this throughout time. And they've done this, I'm convinced, of even dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures. In Natural Bridges National Monument, there's a sign there. I thought maybe that was Kyle there for a second. Kyle and I went out there years ago, which is 40 miles west of Blanding, Utah. 2 of the 3 largest natural bridges are located there. This is called Kachina Bridge, and under Kachina Bridge there are a number of pictographs, drawings, and petroglyphs, carvings, on the underside of this particular bridge. There are carvings, and here are turkeys. You see the turkeys here, y'all? Y'all ever done turkeys with your hands? Some of y'all just don't laugh at anything. That is just not a very funny man up there. Okay, handprints. And what would you guess this looks like? A goat. Look, see, this game is fun, right? What would you guess this represents? Human. Okay, human being. Now let me ask you this: does this really look like me, or is it just like a figure that pretty good It looks like it's a carving on the rock. Look, I could show you a number of these pictographs and petroglyphs, and you're like, oh, okay, I get this. Yep, I see it. Well, right close to that human figure is this. Like, what does that look like? Now you say, now Eric, quit trying to deceive us. You just used your little PowerPoint program there, and this is a statement from an evolutionist in a book he wrote about the rock art of the southwest region of the United States, in which he said, there is a petroglyph or rock carving in Natural Bridges National Monument that bears a startling resemblance to a dinosaur, specifically a brontosaurus, with long tail and neck, small head and all. If this is a long neck, long tailed dinosaur that the Anasazi carved onto rock when they lived there, anywhere from about 600 years ago to, or maybe 500 years ago to 1,500 years ago, if that is the case, what would you conclude by that? I would contend this. Either they saw the creature, or their ancestors saw it and they passed down what it looked like to them. Because people sometimes think that excavating dinosaur bones is an easy thing, and that people they excavate it and you can easily tell this was a dinosaur. Listen, that began in the 1800s. Before that time, there's no evidence of people finding them and reconstructing them to know what they look like. There's evidence of people misinterpreting fossils and bones. Like, do you know where people believe the Cyclops legend came from? From an elephant, a baby elephant skull that has a big hole where the nozzle, the trunk is, and it looks like a big socket for an eyeball. That's where many people believe the Cyclops legend came from. There's evidence of misinterpreting fossils, but there's not evidence of people before the 1800s finding fossils and then painstakingly recreating them accurately to what they originally looked like. In fact, in museums all over the world, they have redone entire wings of museums and exhibits because they thought, well, maybe these fossils were of a creature that looked like this. I was reading of a dinosaur exhibit in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania a few years ago where they were like, we're kind of embarrassed. We've gotten so many things wrong about the dinosaurs, like what they supposedly look like. We're redoing our entire exhibit. There's no evidence that the Anasazis or anyone else around the world were excavating dinosaur bones and recreating them and then drawing. It is within a context, so say the dragon legends, of these people thinking these kinds of animals existed, at least at one time, and then they carved them. Another evolutionist by the name of Dennis Slifer, in his book Guide to Rock Art of the Utah Region, said one of the most curious designs is a petroglyph that resembles a dinosaur, which is apparently of Anasazi origin. And the Anasazis lived there from around, you can fact check me if you want, but I believe it was estimated around AD 450 to about AD 1500. And there's another name that's more commonly used today than the Anasazis, which is another name that's a little more politically correct and accepted, and I've just forgotten what that is at the moment. When Kyle and I went to the Natural Bridges National Monument, we went to the visitor center, and we were just kind of seeing what information they would tell us, and we didn't tell them exactly who we were, where we were from. We were just wanting to hear from them. Hey, what about that? What do people say about that petroglyph there at Natural Bridges that looks like a dinosaur. And by the way, this is how Dennis Slifer, he didn't have a picture of it in his book. This is how he just kind of illustrated it. It doesn't look like a giraffe or anything else, but really a dinosaur. Maybe a Cetiosaurus or a Moosaurus. But when we went to the visitor center, they said, well, people don't really want to talk about this. They don't really want to explain. And then she said, well, it was too early to be a horse. I never thought it looked like a horse anyway. But you see, what historians know is that these natives, they were horseless people. The horses were brought here, you remember by whom? The Spaniards, after the Anasazis had already left this area of the country. Some people think it really is a picture of a dinosaur, but she said they are crazy. Thank you very much. Okay, that's what she said. She indicated that there are petroglyphs that resemble mammoths. There are no mammoths there today. But what do we know? What does she even know? The presence of carvings of mammoths in that area proves what? That those ancient individuals saw them, or their ancestors saw them, in that area most likely. That's where they're drawn. So the petroglyph at Kachina Bridge, she said of that dinosaur-like creature, she said, well, that was just some monster. Well, it was a monster that looked a lot like a long-neck, long-tail dinosaur. By the way, we know of Brontosaurus or Apatosaurus fossils that were excavated from that very area and are on display in a museum in that area. Real quickly, we'll go to Southeast Asia for a moment, to Cambodia, where there are temples that were built there between around AD 700 to AD 1300 long ago. And you can go to one temple known as the Ta Prohm Temple. This one was actually made kind of famous in one of the Lara Croft movies. I don't necessarily recommend, I don't know much about that movie, but I'm just saying this was in it. And at this temple, there are carvings of all sorts of animals. Now, just, okay, like, what would you say, if you had to guess of an animal, like, what does this kind of look like to you? A lizard, a gecko, what's another maybe possible? Look at it. Snake, or not a reptile, a skink. There you go. Skink or a salamander. Yeah. That, so here's my point. You can tell what's really amazing with the carvings there is, like, some of them are birds. And you can tell, well, that looks like a swan. And this one looks like a parakeet of some kind. And this one looks, they're very well done carvings, many of them, of real animals. And then there are, well, here's a column there at the Ta Prohm Temple. And this one, well, I would say, if I had to guess what that is, I would say it looks like some kind of beast, some kind of, I would say, to me it looks more like a water buffalo with his head kind of tilted to his side than anything that's just my guess, okay? But I don't know for sure, but they're very well done. What were you going to say? A hippo with a horn. Okay. All right. Okay, well, I may not know what this one was. What were you going to say? A mountain goat. Huh. That's a pretty fat mountain goat, but that's all right. They can get big. There you go. Okay, but here is the one I wanted to show you. Here's the one I wanted to show you right underneath this one. And I have not been there to see it, but one of our members at Wetumpka has. It's for real. There's no evidence that it's been tampered with and like some, crazy Christian went over there and said, we're going to carve us a dinosaur and make it look more like this. But tell me what that looks like. Stegosaurus? This temple goes back nearly 1,000 years. And it looks like that in addition to all the other animals they carved, that it carved a dinosaur-like creature that looks very similar. In fact, okay, that's like a computer-generated example of what we believe a Stegosaurus would have looked like. But again, there's also, is there a variety of sizes among dogs? Yes. Yeah, so some dogs have bigger heads, some have smaller heads, and there were varieties among dinosaurs as well. By the way, someone gave my kids this toy. It was in an egg that you said you put in water and it would hatch. You ever have one of those? Now, is this a little different than that? Yeah. It's got a fatter head. You don't see the tail spikes, but you see this feature. The toy manufacturer says this is their attempt to, they call this a Stegosaurus. You know, the only criticism I've really heard of this is that, its head is too fat to be a Stegosaurus. And it doesn't have tail spikes. But remember, this person is carving this in a round circle. Carving it in a round circle, and you're limited there just as the toy makers were limited when they made this inside of an egg. All right, I think my time is up. Thank you for your good attention today. I look forward to hanging out with you all just a little more today. If you have questions, you can let me know. I'll hand it back over to Miss Jennifer.
Thank y'all so much for your good attention. I know it was a long time to sit here, but you did a great job. We are going to dismiss our 3rd and 4th grade friends so that they can go get their lunch from over in the primary, and then I will dismiss y'all for you to get your lunch if it's Chick-fil-A day. So if you order Chick-fil-A, it'll be here, but we need just a minute to let our lunch people switch locations. So 3rd and 4th grade friends, you are dismissed. Thank you for coming and for your good attention. Teachers, you can connect with. All right, secondary friends, I think you've all had a chance to pick up the materials that have been graciously provided for us. Those have been made available at no cost. Mr. Lyons, are you willing to sign? You're willing to sign books?
Sure.
Mr. Lyons is willing to sign your autograph your book. If you would like your book autographed, that is an option. He is going to be with us through chapel, through lunch, so you'll have a chance to do that. All right, as soon as we get 3rd and 4th grade out, if you're a secondary student and you need to go get lunch from the locker, you may go do that. And then if you are eating lunch here, hang tight. And then, yes, I do have trouble, and whether you ordered lunch or not, you can get one either now or when you come back in. So, all right, secondary, if you need to go to your locker, you can, and then when the door opens, you can have lunch.
They look a little bit modified.